Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, what do you know about the divine feminine? Let's talk about that. And to help us talk about it in the best way possible is my guest, who's my wife. So obviously, I really am targeting the divine feminine for a reason because I'm married to one. And she's been on my show a couple times before, and I love talking with her, even in an interview. So we're going to talk about the divine feminine, goddesses, all kinds of interesting phenomena that we all should embrace within ourselves. Even I should embrace my divine feminine, uh, even though I'm married to a very strong version of it. Maybe I have a strong version of it in myself. Who knows? But to help us find out more about this, let me introduce my resident expert, my wife, Deborah Roth.
Literally and figuratively.
Right.
Well, and I'm nodding already with with a bunch of things that you said, Peter. My divinely masculine, and we'll talk about that too, mate and partner for life. Because I always say that when I'm teaching and talking about the divine feminine, that it is gender free. It does not matter whether you're male, female, or how you identify gender wise. And by that I mean when we talk about the qualities that represent the divine feminine, they are qualities that have been uh, well, they're now starting to reemerge in a big way and have probably for the last several decades, but they've definitely been denigrated and defiled and worse over the last, I would say, several millennia, given the patriarchal civilizations that still are flourishing around the world. And they represent qualities like compassion, vulnerability, emotional intelligence, nurturing, honoring our bodies. I mean, our bodies were so in the early Christian days, you were supposed to transcend your body in order to connect with the divine. Um, Whereas the divine feminine is very much about accessing whatever the divine is for you, God, goddess, universe, however you want to connect with sacred, with the sacred, with spirit, that it can very much be through your bodies, and through that also our connection to nature. So and the other thing that's interesting is that when you think of the brain, right side, we know about right brain, left brainness. Right brain is typically more connected to our intuition, our emotions, how we express those emotions. Left brain is more rational, logical, strategic. Now, just like with the divine feminine, divine masculine energies, we need both the right brain and the left brain. We'd never get anything done, if we didn't have those divinely masculine, those left brain connected qualities. So it's just a question of how do we tap into that in ourselves. And I believe very passionately that as we do that, as we've been doing that, as I said, over the last, I don't know, probably half a century, we've really woken up more around the divine feminine. As we do that within ourselves, we are, like the hundredth, what is it, the hundredth monkey syndrome, where as we rise it within ourselves, we are elevating those qualities in the rest of the world. So that's just kind of a context of globally how I perceive this passion of mine, and I'm not by far not alone, but the real yearning to get back to these qualities so that we can rebalance how things have gotten so out of whack in the world.
Well, there's a lot of interest in spirituality now versus religion.
Right.
And yet, what is spirituality? It really is very complex because it's too easy to just fall back on religious dogma and conservative views on structure. That world is just made up of of physicality, and our brains are physical, and our thoughts come from our physical brains, and yet once you start delving into a deeper spirituality, you realize how universal everything is and how everything is connected together, but in complex ways. So
Yeah,
it's
even
really
together. It's not a either or. It's not, oh, we can't have structure if we're going to be and if we're going to be spiritual. I mean, we do
right.
need to have strong spiritual containers to hold our to hold our wisdom in, to hold our sacred selves in.
And yet it's very complex, and a lot of minds really don't want to climb into identifying these esoteric natures in us, because you have to use your imaginative spirit. You have to really identify our let's call it the godliness or the
Right.
goddessness in ourselves in that larger universal way, and to see it flowing among everybody together in ways that we're all, let's call it, children of spirit, and want to share it with each other, but in the magic of our uniqueness and the magic of
Right.
our also our gender uniqueness. And we should talk about that a little bit, because gender is being thrown around in ways nowadays, at least politically, that's not that comfortable.
Well, and I think being able um, to touch the place within us where the goddess dwells, where the divine feminine dwells, where those masculine qualities, the positive masculine, the divine masculine qualities dwell, and to find and to see how they integrate. It's not an either or. So when I said to you, yes, we need. When I do women's circles, I create women's rituals on the new moon, and I do meditations on the full moon. But when I create physical ritual space, what I learned early on is that while we do very wonderful spiritual, magical work in the midst of it, there has to be a sound container. That's where my left brain comes in. That's, I know that there's got to be a structure. I mean, early on when I was first learning all this stuff 20 years ago, I was creating a circle with someone that I didn't know really well, and she was like, "Oh, let's just show up and see what happens," and that the energy is just so amorphous. I mean, you need to have a clear intention. You need to to be intentional about creating your sacred space, to have a specific thing that you're creating sacred space around. Is this a circle, or is this a circle for healing? Is it one for nurturing? Is it one to empower ourselves and remember our inner warrior goddess? Whatever it looks like. But I think it's the balance that needs to happen instead of these two extremes. And one of the things I talk about every week, I've been doing since you know this, Peter, because I always tell you don't let the phone ring, don't do anything in the bathroom because it's right up against my office wall at home. That I do these videos since July, August 2020, right towards the beginning of the pandemic, that I call my Inner Goddess Team videos. And I've just since then, so it's been, gosh, almost 2 years. Each week I highlight a different goddess from anywhere around the world, literally, you
And
name
so
it.
many of these videos are on YouTube that people can go and see to
Well,
you.
yeah, that's
You
what
can
I
go to
said.
your
Right,
YouTube channel.
right. If you just go to YouTube, and I didn't used to be that way, so maybe there's enough there, or maybe I have enough subscribers now. I don't know what it is, that if you go to YouTube and just search for Deborah Roth, you'll find, or hashtag Inner Goddess Team. Either one of those will take you to either a video or to the page itself. And what I'm very intentional about doing each week is not only, and I have so much fun, not only diving into the mythology of these various goddesses, whether they're from Africa or the Celtic lands or Asia, wherever it is, and I try and pick goddesses that maybe have some sort of celebration that week, or we just went past the spring equinox, so maybe so goddesses that were connected with the onset of spring. So I try and find some either seasonal or festive wise connection with these goddesses. And each one, I make very clear what the divinely feminine qualities are that are embodied, that are represented by this particular goddess, and encourage people to, when you need a little extra power, full steam ahead power, um, you know, check into Lilith, or, any of the really powerful she was sometimes, those of us in the women's spirituality world talk about her being the first feminist. I won't go into her story here, but then there's nurturing and compassion goddesses like Kuan Yin from the Far East. So you literally can evoke these archetypes. That's what they are. These goddesses, these representations of the divine feminine. When you need a little pump in one of those areas, when you
There was
need some healing.
there was a time when I was invoking Kali.
Yes. Well, you gotta be careful of Kali. She's pretty heavy duty because she's
I,
death, destruction. She's fiercely protective of her children. I mean,
well, that's where I fit in.
yes, you definitely do. That is for sure.
Right.
So it's been, for me, it's just been such a journey. I mean, if you saw, well, you've seen my office, Peter, but anybody who's been in my office knows that it's filled with goddess figures. That when I go back to doing my new moon circles live again, I've been doing them over Zoom for the last 2 years. I'm hoping, maybe, crossing fingers, that the new moon coming up at the end of April, which is the day before May Day, Beltane as it was known in the Celtic lands, that would be just such a great one to go back and be able to do it live. But when I do them live, I look around my office and see which goddess we should be evoking for that particular energy. For instance, we're just coming up to the Aries new moon. It's always the first new moon after the spring equinox, and Lilith would be one that I would bring there, or Athena is another one. That she's a warrior goddess, but she's also the goddess of wisdom. And we, there's something so empowering about standing in a circle or standing by yourself. And I have all these props, all these things that I've gotten over the years, including, as a for instance, to embody this divinely feminine quality of empowerment. I have a shield and a sword and a helmet, like what that I got from Toys R Us years ago. And women will stand there, or a double-edged sword, what they call a labrys, or double-edged axe, and stand there and declare what their superpower is. What is it that they do really well? And when you bring your body into that declaration, it's so powerful. You literally embody that quality, and it's a symbolic action. That's all ritual is a symbolic action. Symbols also live in the unconscious. They live in the right brain. So, even if you've got, my wedding ring, even long past I couldn't repeat my vows now if I had to, but it represents, and it's always carried within me.
But you're living them.
Sorry, yes.
Okay.
That's the idea. So there's so much that's really, it's quite, I love the symbolism of it. I'm doing a wedding today. Those of you that are seeing the video, I've got my wedding makeup on. I'm not usually quite this dolled up. And I'm doing it for a dear friend who asked me to do it, but she says I'm really practical. I'm you know all the symbol stuff, and yet she gets when I talk about, yeah, I mean, we're doing a unity candle and there are 2 kids involved, so each one of you has a candle that represents, that symbolizes your uniqueness, your individuality, and then you light the center candle together, which represents your new family. All of that is very meaningful, and that's, as humans, we yearn for meaning. That, we've learned that over the last several years. We yearn for connection and meaning. And that's part of what these divinely feminine qualities of, that go into making rituals, to doing weddings, the coaching that I do, everything that I do is rooted in these qualities that I've talked about, in the divine feminine.
And I'm thinking of basically the feminine archetype of of the um, of the gatherers versus the hunters,
Right.
and how gatherers work together. You have to gather
Exactly.
together, and hunters often work alone or sometimes in teams, but they're quiet because you have to surprise your prey.
Right.
So it's a very different mentality that men come from, and yet we're coming to a time now in this Aquarian age where all of the divine feminine has to be in men has to be revealed for us to cooperate and create a better world.
Yes, definitely. And there have been really amazing studies, a really old one, but there's probably been more since then, that talk about how how important it is. And well, and the one I'll just describe briefly is we're a bunch of scientists in a lab in California, and the women scientists noticed that when the lab was under stress financially or whatever, that the women would gather and kind of commiserate, and the men would kind of, hibernate into their separate areas. And they really acknowledge, and the phrase is escaping me now, but the another phrase that's from feminist psychology that describes that is self in relation. So you define yourself, not completely. You can't, it's not like you're living for someone else. It's not that you're not putting yourself first, because that's a huge component of divinely feminine living is self-care and, self-love. But to be able um, to connect and to bond, to create that sense of community that you're talking about.
Right. And so this new age is in a way is I can't say it might be you could say sneaking up on us because we're in the middle of toxic times. So we're not sure what's going on, but it pushes us to relate more to each other. It pushes us to need community even more, but in a way that's divine, in a way that honors
Yes.
the soul of each person.
Well, and to understand that both, when I talk about the divine feminine or the divine masculine, that it all kind of operates on a spectrum. Toxic femininity, and there is such a thing, would be if you're a doormat, if you're taking everybody, care of everybody else before you take care of yourself. If you're being so submissive that that you just kind of fade into the work, into the background. Toxic masculinity, well, we see that with wars and the kind of aggressiveness. Assertive is great. So assertive would be, a divinely masculine trait. Aggressive, especially overly aggressive, road rage, that kind of thing, is one of the ways that toxic masculinity can show up. And it's interesting because we've heard that phrase before. Those are kind of the macho. We talk about toxic masculinity looking like that, but there is such a thing as, and it probably wouldn't be called, I don't know what it would be called, the toxic femininity, but it's when you allow yourself to be just rolled over.
Or
And
the opposite. I would say toxic. I was thinking when you said toxic femininity, that it means that women aren't embracing their divine feminine, but want to emulate patriarchal
yeah, but then
power.
that's right. I hear. I don't know where that falls in there, because that's not. Those aren't feminine traits to be able to emulate
Right, but it's women
masculine.
using them.
Well, but in the '80s, when I was in the corporate world, and we wore our little three-piece suits and our little bow ties,
I
and
remember,
remember
I
that?
remember you. You know,
Whoa!
it was
Oh
a
yeah,
different persona when you got into your
totally.
business clothes.
Yep. I got my flowy dresses and my moon necklace and my dangly earrings. That was my declaration of one of my declarations of independence when I left the corporate world, is to just let my earrings get longer and longer. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about, and it's not even balance. Sounds like, I mean, integration, I think, is more the word when I think about how we embrace these qualities within ourselves. And I think, I work with couples, obviously marrying them, but I also do couples coaching, and to be able to to recognize, and I said this to you at the beginning, Peter, that you definitely, your ability to talk about your feelings and to be vulnerable and to cry when you talk about your granddaughters, all of those things are that's divinely feminine. That's really beautiful.
Well, I also I accept that in myself, that I have a lot of compassion and a lot of love and feelings, but also that I'm a practicing intuitive, and to be that,
You
that's
all have
very yin.
intuition. That's intuition, definitely.
Yeah,
That's
that's very feminine.
very,
And
very.
yeah, and so I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of being emotional. I love my granddaughters, and and at my age, my senior age, to have little grandchildren is such a gift.
I know. When we have friends whose grandchildren have children.
Right, and so that's right. I have friends my age who have great grandchildren.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's so exciting just to feel change right now, even though it's unsettling. We have no idea where things are going to land next, but we're embracing the more universal nature of ourselves, or the more eternal nature of ourselves,
Hmm.
and that makes us bigger.
Well, yes. I mean, that's, yeah. I think where I'm stumbling is that, yeah, that's a given. And where that fits into the divine feminine, divine masculine conversation is that that's expansive to talk about
Right.
being able to, and just, I think of the couples that I work with, everybody, has this thing about, oh, guys have a hard time talking about their emotions. And what works though is when they do. And really the only way I often say when I'm working with couples that if when I'm interviewed and asked, so what do you think is the single most important thing for a healthy, long-term, successful relationship? And I always say that each side of the couple continues to do their ongoing personal growth, self-discovery work, and separately, because then you bring that, and that brings a sense of balance. That's balancing, reading the books and all the left brain masculine stuff of, being very rational and understanding the relationship skills that you need. But then it's bringing in the feminine of expressing those and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And that's scary. That's not easy. That's courageous work. Whether you're, I've got one client that I'm working with now who's setting boundaries for the first time, which, she probably fit in that category of toxic feminine, of just taking care of everybody else first. And now she's saying no. She's saying, no, I'm not able to do that. And no, you can't call me at, client so and so at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. I'm not picking up the phone anymore. That boundary setting is really one of those ways that I think the divine masculine shows up too, because it is about creating healthy structures, to sustain your life and your work and your relationships, obviously.
That's great. Now, it's so much fun talking about this. We could go on for hours, or
Of
maybe
course.
for years
And we
together.
do. We have.
So, but let's let the audience know how to reach you and work with you.
Okay. So my website, the name of my business is Spirited Living, spirit with an ed, living.com. I've got, 2 pages on Facebook, just my Deborah Roth one and my Spirited Living with Deborah Roth. My YouTube channel, which I talked about, where all my Inner Goddess team videos are on, and there'll be, there are some really old ones. I've had it for like 10 years, but I reactivated it a couple years ago. And then Instagram, I'm Spirited Deb Roth. Yeah, so would love to connect with any and all.
And I love watching you mechanically set all these things up, and it's so much
That's my
fun.
left brain. I get, set up my iPad this way, and I got my, my ring light with the phone thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an
definitely.
inspiration to me. I'm
It's
just,
definitely
I don't know.
you.
I'm not as
Oh, you
handy at
are.
that.
Yeah, but you edit videos. You edit. I don't even know how to do that.
I
This
have
is
my own, yeah, I have my own
you have your own techie skills.
fun.
Together, we fill in a lot of slots.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I'm so happy that we can be a couple talking with each other on a show to inspire other couples maybe to do the same thing,
Yeah, definitely.
to really draw out what they appreciate about each other and let the rest of us know.
Yep, that's for sure.
And I'm so glad you're going to be doing this wedding today with a couple who I admire a great deal.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm excited.
yeah. So we're getting near the end of the show, and I think the audience really just needs to. I'm hearing the word happiness. Just to live in a state of grace
Mm,
that allows grace to draw them through life. That's a real divine feminine, is allowing, embracing,
oh,
holding, and
definitely.
loving.
Going with the flow,
Yeah, right.
literally. Allowing yourself not to be in, and it's circular. I mean, the circle versus, that's why women's circles meet in circles as opposed to in rows. There's so much symbolism that comes with the divine feminine that's very much about creating space and expansiveness.
And holding in
Yes.
that space, in that
Right.
circle. It's wonderful. So thank you for being a guest on Energy Stew.
It's been wonderful to be
and
here.
and thank you for being in my life.
Happy to be there too, vice versa.
Great. Okay, and this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.live. I can be reached at peter@heartriver.org, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.